OCHA Learning webinar series. I'm pleased to introduce the panel first, but then I'd like to quickly hand over to the head of the Learning and Development Unit, Ms. Janet Moritz, who will lead us in the program. So over to you, Janet.
Thank you so much, Alfred, and good afternoon, good morning, and a warm welcome to all of you to this first session in our Learning Exchange webinar series. And our topic today on data literacy, a whole of OCHA approach, is being brought to you in collaboration with the OCHA Center for Humanitarian Data. And I'm super delighted to be launching this webinar series with you. We have a high interest from across all of OCHA, as well as we have some partners who have joined us, so a special welcome to you. Today we see this session as a real opportunity to take some space, some focused time for learning, and to hopefully build some connections and collaboration across the organization and the wider system. And our topic today, data literacy, as you will all agree, it's a fundamental, it's a critical skill for effective humanitarian action from the beginning to the end and all the way in between. And we all have a role to play in it. And yet the topic is incredibly challenging, huge complexities, and it's a contested field. So we hope today to unpack this concept of data literacy. What does it mean? What is good data? How do we get there in terms of the skills and the tools? And fundamental, how can we really use data to make a difference to the people that we serve, the people who are in crisis. And I'm really, really pleased today so to go into this topic. We have Lisa Peterson and Caitlin Rogers, both data literacy leads with the Center for Humanitarian Data, and we're very privileged to have them with us. They have wealth of experience, not only in humanitarian coordination and also the data world. And so a huge thanks to both of you for making the time to be with us today and take us through a journey on this important topic. I'm super delighted to also introduce the rest of the Learning and Development Unit, the team. And we have Cecilia, who's our lead facilitator for the session, and she'll be supported by Alfred, who you already heard and know, Alfred Kutzwati, and Jamar Markov. So I wish you all the best and look forward to this session. Over to you, Cecilia. Thanks.
Thank you, Janet, and a warm welcome to all of you on my side as well. I'm also glad to see that there's many of you, and we really and sincerely hope you're all and your families, you're all healthy and safe in these complicated circumstances. So before we start, just a couple of words on how we are going to handle this session. The webinar is going to be around an hour, approximately an hour. You are very, very welcome, and we do encourage you to actively take part on the discussion. So we do keep on monitoring the chat. So we do encourage you to use the chat for any comments, any input you may want to contribute at any time in the webinar. Of course, if you would prefer to make your comments with the microphone, please just raise your hand and we will unmute you and we will give you the floor. So the session is recorded, and just a question, just to preserve the connectivity and not avoid that the video are affecting actually the connectivity, we will switch our videos off for the rest of the session. So we would invite those of you who have the video on to also switch it off, just to preserve a smooth webinar so we don't have connectivity issues. I hope this is fine with you. Now, before handing over to our subject matter expert, we would like to do a little exercise. We have heard from you in the survey. However, we would like to have a sense of where you come from, where you're located. So why don't you take the arrow? There is an arrow on the top left of the screen that you should be seeing now. Why don't you take your arrow and just place it on the map? So we will just have an idea of where you're located, and this will be useful and interesting for us. So thanks, I see that you're all doing it. So we see Makiha in the Far East. Hello, Makiha, good to see you. We see a lot, probably from Geneva or Europe. We see a lot of colleagues from North Africa, West Africa, Central Africa. It's very good to see that we are really covering many areas. Anybody else who is not able to use the map, please write on chat, and we will, as I mentioned, monitor the chat. Okay, so we have additional colleagues from New York. Yeah. And we have Lisa, who is based also in the States. Perfect. Thank you so much. So I think we have a very good diversity in the geographical locations, which is very welcome. Okay, let me now move on to some of the extract. We do thank you for filling out the survey. We thank you, those of you who took the time to share a little bit of your background and your expectations for this webinar. So I just would like to share a few highlights which I thought were interesting and also could give us a little bit of a basis to start our discussion. So as you can see on the screen, these are some of the issues, some of the challenges, some of the expectations that you have for the session. And I do believe that our subject matter expert now will be absolutely able to address all of these. And if you would like to comment or provide additional background, additional inputs on these areas that you shared, please, you're welcome to do so. And by the way, I also remember from the survey that some of you have also expressed willingness and availability to share during this webinar about some of the good practices that you are experiencing in your respective countries and offices. So once again, you're very welcome to do so. Now, let me hand over to the colleagues now who will start the presentation, and I will hand over now the presentation, right? So let me just do this. Let me close the video. 1 second, please bear with me. Voila. So please, Caitlin, please, Lisa, now you have the presenters right, and please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning. Caitlin, you have the presenters right, so I'll just read to the slides, and then you can navigate. There we go. I have it now. Good morning. This is Lisa. Caitlin and I welcome you, and we want to thank the Learning and Development Unit for inviting us to present today, and all of you, of course, for your participation. So what we wanted to do was just briefly go over the 3 objectives that we have for this and how it kind of aligns with the content that we're going to go over. So what we wanted to do today was to go over kind of what data literacy is, kind of situated in people's minds and in their work, and give an understanding of why it's important and the data skills that we need for a given role. We want to talk a little bit about data-driven questions and also go over how we communicate and the findings of our data-driven questions with simple visualization. So we have kind of 3 sections to the session here today. One is going over this whole of office approach that no matter what your role is, you play a critical role in working with data and data management, and that your skills really fit your role. And then these areas where we converge are where we're developing and formulating data questions to drive our exercises, and then we also converge on visualizations, whether we're creating visualizations, we're contributing to their development, we're reviewing them or interpreting them, we're all working with visualizations in some way. So these are kind of our objectives and the 3 areas that we're going to touch upon today. And just kind of to introduce you a little bit to the center, so Cecilia had said, Caitlin and I are the co-leads of the data literacy work stream of the Center for Humanitarian Data, and that is part of OCHA's information management branch. There are 3 other work streams. One of them is data services, and you all may be familiar with HDX, so the Humanitarian Data Exchange. That work falls under data services. The data policy work stream is doing work on data responsibility guidelines, which a lot of people may have already seen, and they're working on IASC guidance with that. There's us, the data literacy work stream, and then we also have a new predictive analytics work stream, which is looking at anticipatory action and really supporting offices on their humanitarian response plans. That's just a little bit about the center of who we're with. So this first part that we wanted to go over was this whole of office approach, and we want to talk about the idea of why we need to take a whole of office approach to data management and why data literacy is important and why we have focused on non-technical humanitarians, so really beefing up those skills. So just to kind of put that out there, the whole of office approach is something that was actually coined by our field information services colleagues, and it generally means that staff members are equipped with the skills and knowledge to carry out their individual data tasks and to contribute to data exercises for their given role, and also to teamwork, to data exercises that involve teams that they can contribute for their given roles. So first, what we want to do is kind of talk about a little bit what data literacy is. So I'm going to hand this all back to Cecilia. We wanted to talk a little bit about how we define data literacy in our own work and how you see data literacy. And so we're going to use the chat function for this. And we wanted to see how you would define data literacy or being data literate for your own job or your own role, or what does data literacy mean to you? So we're inviting you to put your contributions or what your thoughts are in the chat, and Cecilia is going to help us by reading them out.
Yes, please use the chat, or if you want to use the whiteboard, this is another fun way of brainstorming. So you just need to use, sorry, instead of the arrow, you just use your T. You just place your cursor on the T, and you can write anything you want. So voila, please contribute here. So this is a test. So you can either use chat or use the whiteboard. You're welcome in both ways. So it's going to be about what you believe data literacy means to you and what it means to be data literate from your own perspective. So please feel free. Let's take the next 2-3 minutes to have this little brainstorming. And Makiha, I will take care of erasing your arrow. There's no issue. Clear. So is it easy for you just to click on the T? Next to your arrow, there is a little T. Voila. So I see that colleagues are starting to use it. And you can click on the T and then place the cursor on the whiteboard. And please make sure that you put your cursor away, you move it away from what you've written. Otherwise, we will not be able to read it. Okay. So we see able to interpret the data and concisely and accurately represent the data in the report as a narrative. Understand data, be able to tell story from data. Perfect. Ability to use data for effective decision making. Thank you. Anything else? Anybody else? Please use the chat if you're more comfortable to use the chat. There is absolutely no problem. Anybody else? Knowing how to collect, treat, and analyze data. Culture to use data to understand and explain situation and phenomenon. Perfect. Anybody else? Or otherwise, yeah, understand data and be comfortable applying and analyzing it. Yes, absolutely. Maybe we have a good enough number of contributions that can get us started, Lisa and Caitlin, knowing how to identify issues on data that you collect, receive from participants. For me, it is the ability to collect, organize it, and produce information for proper decision making. Yeah. Any last contribution before we move on?
Yes, from the chat, being data literate is understanding and sharing data easily.
Yes, thank you, Alfred. To know the best way to represent data visually. Okay, I think we have already a good baseline here for Lisa and Caitlin to take us through the definition and the concept of data literacy. So now there's, another input here from Federica. Oh, the whiteboard is not working for you, but data literacy means being able to analyze, interpret, and use data and turn it into information products understandable by different audiences. So here we have another element, so the understandability by different audiences. And Henry, ability to understand data and manage to inform people. I think I've read them all, and I apologize if I missed any. So let me turn now over back to the presentation, and I will give the presenters right back to, I believe it's Lisa.
Yes.
Sorry, it's not Lisa. Here.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, please go ahead. And thank you colleagues for participating. Please, Lisa.
So all very good contributions there to defining what data literacy is. And just briefly here, looking at how we, the center, define literacy. And I think many of what you guys already put in there is included in this. So it's briefly the ability to read, work with, analyze, and converse with data. And you can see under each of those how we're kind of describing that. And we have added to it this notion of functional data literacy. So this means that you are given data, you are data literate for your given role, that not everybody has the same skill set. And we're going to dig into that in a little bit more detail in the next slides. Embedded in this concept of reading is being able to read data is the ability to form data questions, which is what we're going to touch on today. And then as well, in conversing with data, embedded in that is the ability to use generated insights as evidence for our messages, but also to be able to visualize, visualize data, whether you're creating them, you're using them in your communications, or you're interpreting them. So this is briefly what our definition of data literacy is. And I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin now, who's going to walk us through this in a little bit more detail.
Great. So as I think I'm getting right to the presentation now. So about a little over a year ago, we had done a survey of humanitarians, and we found that 98% of humanitarians are working with data all the time, or at least occasionally. I would argue that the roughly 2% that they're using data never, just don't know that they are using data. But the idea is that we're all using data in our day-to-day work, which is why you guys are on the call, which is why you're kind of defining these broad concepts of how to understand data, to be able to use it to inform people. So that's really great. Already we have a good understanding here on this call of what it means to be working with data. But data literacy, it can be a little bit vague. So what does it mean for me to be data literate within my job? So Lisa and I have started talking about what we call functional data literacy. So what it means to be able to have the knowledge and skills to be able to do your job effectively. And as your jobs change throughout your career, this might look different. So as you move from an information management officer to the head of the unit, you might have to use different skills. Your functional data literacy will evolve, which is fantastic. So we've kind of broadly broken down different skills that we think kind of fall into these 3 different categories, which I would say are more of a spectrum than, distinct categories. But we talk about strategic data skills, sense-making data skills, and technical skills. So often we jump straight to the technical skills, which here we kind of define as the knowledge and capacities required to execute data exercises. But a lot of the things that sometimes we seem to be lacking as a sector and as organizations more generally is some of these strategic data skills and these sense-making data skills. So strategic data skills, the data required to manage and use data like an asset. So to me, when I think of this, I think of like, are we asking good questions? Are we driving processes to ensure that we have data that can answer those questions? And are we making sure that we're using data to inform our actions? And then the sense-making skills are what often are called like bridge skills, and that's the ability to kind of translate strategic priorities into data exercises, and then take those data products that result from the data exercises and translate them back into data-informed decision-making. So great. So we have these 3 broad categories. And the way I like to think about this is that I can now think about myself and my role and the data exercises I'm involved in, and I can map out different skills that I might need along different places in an information management cycle. So we have these kind of broad information management cycles. We start with planning, then we go to data acquisition. Sometimes it's called finding data, getting data, data collection. Then we have data wrangling, which can be called verifying and cleaning and processing data, to analysis, to visualization and storytelling, to data-informed decision-making. And depending on my role, I might require different skills. So, and some of these places we can see maybe there's more heavily technical and others are more heavily strategic. So I see like the way we've mapped this out in this visualization is at the planning level, we have a lot of strategic and sense-making data skills and maybe less of that kind of technical executing data skills, but over an analysis, maybe it's a little bit more technical. And I don't think any one of us fits into one distinct category, so it kind of depends on the exercise that we're contributing to. So we kind of move fluidly between these, and depending on the exercise, sometimes I might be doing the data wrangling myself, so I'm performing some technical data skills, but other times I might be commissioning something, and then maybe I'm having a more strategic role. So it kind of depends on our general role and what role we're playing vis-a-vis a specific data exercise. So that's how we're kind of thinking about it. So then when we thought about this webinar, we have an hour, I have an hour left. Like where do we all converge? And where do we sometimes see great opportunities for improvement? And to me, 2 of those places where we all converge and that we, every day, every single one of us is defining questions that will drive data exercises, even if that's in our personal life, you know, the decisions we make when we go to the supermarket and what kind of food we need to get, those are data-driven decisions often, all the way to presenting that information, whether it's presenting for data-driven decisions to our partners or our colleagues. You know, we're in everyday life and in our work, we're always defining data questions and we're presenting that information to colleagues. So those are the 2 things that we're going to focus on today. So I'm going to hand over to Lisa again, who's going to take us through how to form good data-driven questions.
Okay, so here we are. So this first part where Caitlin highlighted the define area in our data management pipeline or information management process, this is the first step of how we ask a question or how we start our data exercises. And we did a lot of research to come up with our definition, and Caitlin talked about this survey, and we talked to a lot of people in the field and at headquarters around data management and data literacy, and this question or this concept came up again and again about starting our exercises, our data exercises with questions. One respondent or interview respondent that we talked to said we don't even know the questions we're trying to answer often. And so what we want to take here is just a bit of time, I think 7 minutes to be exact, to look at how the importance of having a question to start your data exercise, of not just having it, but how to have a better question. And so it's kind of starting your data exercise with intention. And so we have a couple of examples from some of our colleagues that we interacted with, and we wanted to kind of just take a second here or a few minutes here and ask you guys, our participants, about any situations that you have had. So have you collected or acquired data that wasn't useful because the driving question wasn't fully clarified? Can you share any lessons learned on that? Or what have you done, or what steps or processes have you taken to help focus your data exercise? And that by the data exercise, we mean the data acquisition and the analysis. So we want to just kind of hear from you about the importance of having a question to drive your exercise. Have you experienced where you've gotten into the thick of things before you realized you don't have a question to kind of drive you? So I think, Cecilia, we're going to use the whiteboard again here. I can hand it
No,
over.
we're going to use the chat, which is probably working for all of you, because I understand for some colleagues, whiteboard is not working. So please feel free to type in your comments in the chat. We will read them aloud. If you prefer to speak, well, just raise your hand. But please do share your comments. Do share your lessons learned. And I'm also calling in particular to the colleagues who had express their willingness to share. So I remember Cordobas and I. So if you have anything from your best practices, good practices that you think is relevant to share at this time, please feel free to do so. So let's give it another 2-3 minutes to share your comments.
We see analysis framework, and somebody even seconded that. Who needs the information, who needs what information to make which decision. Very good. What else? Are there any other steps or processes that you've used to help focus your data exercise, or have there been any other experiences or lessons learned from collecting data that wasn't useful due to kind of a lack of clarity on the question?
Maybe the colleagues will will contribute as you speak, Lisa. So maybe let's keep on reflecting, and if you want to share even at a later time, please feel free to do so.
Yeah. So the two that are there that have been put in, analysis framework and who needs what information to make which decision, all very good, and kind of ties in along with what we're going to talk about here. So if we distill kind of that data management pipeline that Caitlin showed earlier, that information management process, into 3 steps, we look at...
Excuse me, Lisa, can I interrupt you for a second? I see that there was Francis having raised a hand. So do you mind if we take this?
No. Go ahead, Francis. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Francis. Let me unmute you. Please go ahead, Francis. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I have is about the driving questions, and sometimes we are challenged by the expectation of the decision makers, and they have some requests, and they have already what they have in their mind as expectations. And when we start by questioning them to better understand, in fact, as a view of IMO, information manager, is different from decision makers, and sometimes it's like we are confusing them, or they are thinking we are not efficient, or we are not doing our job. So sometimes we have to jump that steps. My question is, how do you have some advice about that? Over.
Thank you, Francis. And let me also take Kodobe. I see Kodobe also has his hands raised. Please, Kodobe.
Hello, are you hearing me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for this time, and actually I want to share based on what the digital literacy plan that I saw. It's actually helpful. I think for all data collection, it starts from the question. If you don't have good question, then all the data we'll be collecting will not fit to answer our question. And beside the question, we have to develop tools. The tools that have to be developed also will be a great importance if we want to use, because sometimes we develop tools that will not be helpful for us, because we can ask good questions, but if we don't have good tools to collect the data, then it will become a problem. We have faced a lot of challenges sometimes because of not asking good questions. Usually what I do is to collect data as large as possible, because today we may want this kind of data, and we know that collecting data usually takes time, and if you don't collect it early enough, then when you are in need, you will not be able to actually have data on hand. So usually we have a broad-based data collection. Then you use data as it comes. I don't know if it's actually much clear. So data are usually not, what do I say, that are not useful. It may be useful in 2 years' time. It may be useful today, but data that we collect usually will be used for some days, either for cost verification, what we call triangulation, or in another setting. So that's what I wanted to share on this.
Thank you, Kodobe. Thank you very much. Welcome. Let me now just turn to the chat. There was a contribution from Makiha. So Makiha is saying often data collection is done by partners and clusters, not OCHA, and I receive not useful ones because what came out were often not data, but just narrative info. So it is important to make it clear that we are looking for data, not information, when we create questions. All right, so I will turn it now over to Lisa. Lisa, if you want to take it from here and address some of these useful comments. Over.
Yeah, I think that we'll cover this first one of expectation of, decision makers and maybe a disconnect there, and just very good point. I think the second one was about having these questions drive the data that you're asking, you're acquiring. We don't always do this primary data collection, and so as being as explicit and specific as we can in what we're asking helps us answer, get better answers. And so kind of I'll go over that, briefly here in the next few minutes, but all very good points. And I think that as upfront as we can be and clear as we can be. When, I had said earlier, being intentional in our data exercises, the better it is for us and throughout this process. So when we, I had said this ask, answer, act is basically that data pipeline, but in 3 kind of succinct steps. We need to ask a question, attempt to answer it, and then act on that answer. And when Caitlin and I talk about data exercises, we're talking about big ones, but we're also talking about the small ones that we do every single day in our work, at our own desk, in our, individually. So these are data exercises from big to small, whether it's a solitary exercise that you're undertaking, you're asking yourself a question, or one that is a team effort, that every day the work that we do is carried out to ask, to answer, and to act. So I just wanted to give you kind of two scenarios that we came upon when we were doing a data literacy training. Is how do I analyze this? We kind of all jump to, we think that data literacy or data management is analysis, but it starts with this question. So the first one, this first scenario, is that if we miss that first step of asking a question, so if we ask, answer, and act, if we miss that first step, then it's really hard to answer it. And so this first situation is one that we've all been in, where we have a beautiful data set, or maybe not such a beautiful data set, and we want to do analysis, and we're stuck on where to start with analyzing data. If we have a data set, or if we even have, a number of data sets in front of us, how do we start to analyze it? And much of this, not knowing how to analyze it, is not knowing what we want to know. And so it's taking a moment to pause and to ask yourself what it is you really want to know. A second situation or scenario that we saw was even having a questionnaire in hand. A colleague who had this questionnaire, and they wanted it to tell them something, to reveal the analysis or the findings. And this is hard. This can happen if you don't have a refined kind of framing question or questions. It could be multiple ones that kind of serve as your North Star there to help you analyze and draw conclusions. And so, again, it's to pause and ask yourself, what do you want to know? And then in, this instance with a questionnaire, and then map, if you need to retroactively back that up and map your questions to that, in your survey to that overarching question. But it's first knowing what you want to know specifically. So just another illustration of this and why it's important is that if we miss that first step of asking, it affects every other step in this process. So if we ask and we answer, if we're not clear on what we actually want to know, then it affects every other step. So when we have a question, it focuses and frames our data exercise, so we know the data that we're looking for, and it affects every step. So every step that we then go to, we kind of use that question to help us. So the data that we're looking for, so how we find and we get and we verify. Even cleaning can be informed by our question. How we analyze is definitely informed by our question, and how we present data is informed by our question. So it's first having this overarching one, and then, using tools like an analysis framework to help you with that. And so questions drive our data exercises, and they drive all of our data exercises. And unfortunately, as I had mentioned at the beginning, this is a step that's often missed, that will create a data collection form without kind of understanding what it is we want to know, so that we can be parsimonious in the way that we're asking for data, and then it's very specific to what we want to know. So let's go to the next slide. I was going to just quote.
Lisa, just to say another contribution on chat from Anna. Anna says, when it comes to decision making, I think OCHA as a whole needs to improve. Even though we consider ourselves as an information organization, I think we still need to build a bridge between IM and PI and decision making.
Yeah, very good. I mean, a very good point. And I think what we had talked about before is, if we all have data skills and we all understand where we contribute in this data management process or data pipeline, we're coming together with the adequate skills for our role. And so very well said, Anna, and thank you for that. So I'll just move on to the next slide. I know what I was going to do. I was just going to say something about Albert Einstein, that he knew the importance of questions, that he said if he had an hour to solve a problem and his life depended on it, he'd spend 55 minutes determining the proper question, because he could then answer it in 5 minutes. This is how important Einstein saw questions. So just kind of some basic steps for getting our exercises off right. So if you know, we talked about the importance of having a question, first of all. So having a question enables you to then to move on, to understand what it is you want to collect, but not just having a question. We also want to talk about how we have better questions. And this is articulating exactly what we want to know. And I think that one of the participants had talked about this. And so how do we get better questions? And 3 guides that we have here are being specific, being relevant, and being comprehensive in our questions, and using these as kind of guides. And they're similar to SMART. We've all heard of SMART for our indicators: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So these are kind of 3 guides that can help you first get your question, have a question, and then kind of compare it to this to make sure that it's good enough, that it can guide you. And this is to help us provide the answers that we need. So when we talk about being specific here, we're talking about in terms of the terms that we use and the disaggregation. So we're talking about the what, the who, the where, and the when. So the what is any terms that we need to define, such as vulnerability or adequate. Who is it that we want to know? Are there segments of the population that we're interested in, such as sex and age disaggregation? Where do we want to know when we're talking about our question, on what scale or depth of detail for the geographic focus? When? Is there a time frame for our question that we want to know? Is it the past year or is it the past month? This idea of relevancy. So all data exercises, you're doing this for a reason. And what is it? What's the purpose or the objective? And making sure that your question, and I think this kind of is that bridge to decision makers, that you're really drilling into these questions so that they're relevant, so that they can provide you answers for your purpose or objective. And it's making sure that we rein that in and we frame our questions so that we don't go off on tangents, and we're only asking questions that are relevant to our purpose or objective. The third one is being comprehensive. So knowing that we're trying to focus this on and being specific and tying it into getting what we need to know, asking our questions so we can answer it to drive our purpose or to do our action, which is our purpose or objective, making sure that our question includes everything that we need to understand, or the answer that we need for our decision or action. And this includes our level of confidence or accuracy that is acceptable to us. So having an understanding, having our questions be specific, relevant, or comprehensive, first you get it, and then you kind of refine it. You make sure that it's specific enough so that it can drive the data that you're seeking and the way that you're finding it, and the way that you're cleaning it and analyzing it. Let me go to the next slide here. And this does not probably come, and again, going back to that first comment that was made, it may not be that your question is perfect the first time. And so understanding that many data exercises are solitary, you're doing them, but also some are ones that you've been asked to answer from a supervisor or a boss, and there is this iterating of your question. So if you get a broad question, you iterate it through being specific and relevant and comprehensive to get this sharp question. So you can ask questions of your questions. So if it's broad, kind of making sure that it's specific with that what, who, where, and when, and making sure that you're tying it back that I'm asking this because it's important for me to know this for my purpose and objective. And also this is the level of, and it's all of this that I need to know, but it's only this. And so it's kind of iterating this broad question if you're, with with yourself if it's too broad, or with your boss or your supervisor or another team that's asking this question, and making sure that it's sharp. And that's what's going to get you on a good path to kind of understanding, so that you're not going into a data set not knowing how to analyze. So getting specific, just an example of this is, we'll just use a simple example of COVID. I think it's all out there now. So what questions would you ask of this question? So if a broad question is, I want to know how bad is COVID in our country, then we would ask, you know, this is a broad question. If we want to kind of do that iteration and get to a sharper question, we could say, what do we mean by bad? Is that the number of new confirmed and suspected cases? Is it the number of deaths? Is it the number of cumulative cases or ventilators? So what is it that we want to know, and what do we mean by bad? Who are we interested in with this? Is this different age groups or different genders, maybe different living situations such as IDPs or informal settlements? And where are we interested in this? Just understanding is, do we want this at the national level, or are we interested in subnational levels, or maybe just urban areas? And what's our time frame here? So for COVID, the 14-day or the 5-day period is important. So how far do we want to go back? So when you get these questions, trying to articulate them in a more focused way and being more specific helps drive all of your next steps. So from getting your data to cleaning it to analyzing it, and kind of having this conversation of asking questions of your questions, and if it's with your supervisor or even with yourself, it's going to make it more clear and more intentional. So these past few slides, or this first section of our presentation, was just talking about questions, having them be specific, relevant, and comprehensive, and kind of maybe talking about why it's important to have that up front, and using things like analysis frameworks to help you get more specific in that, and that it's kind of helps focus and inform all of the other steps of our data exercises, so all the way down through visualization, which is what Caitlin is going to go into next. Caitlin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Hi, back. Okay, so how we present data. So this is visualization, but it's also more generally how we communicate and tell stories with data. And we use data to try to convince people to take actions that we want them to take. And we can't always control. Anna made a really good point that, like, you know, sometimes there's this gap between public information, IM, and decision makers. So we can't control everything, but if we are able to present information in the most actionable way, then we stand a better chance of getting those actions to be taken. So how do we present data? So we have a little exercise now. So I want you to imagine that you're walking into a data visualization art gallery. And so you walk in and there's data visualizations all over the wall. And I want you to ask yourself a few questions about the data visualizations that I'm about to show you. So the first question is just intuitively, what is the message? What are the creators of the visualization trying to convey? Who is the visualization for? Who do you think the audience of the visualization is? And then, you know, this is your opinion. Do you like it? Is it effective? Do you think it's, I guess, is it effective and do you like it are two different things, but yeah, you can answer either one of them. So our first visualization is this one. So in the chat function, if you just want to start kind of jotting down who you think this visualization is for, what do you think the message of the visualization is, and is it effective at conveying that message? And then bonus question is, do you like it or not? I've deliberately stripped some of the context away from this visualization. So I'm trying to see, does it stand on its own?
Please use the chat, colleagues, to respond. Thanks.
assume people are typing.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Caitlin, there is a comment from Anna saying, I believe we need to improve the way we present data and also help the clients to understand what it means, either by narrative analysis or by explaining how to read a chart.
Anna, you're
yeah.
crushing it. That was going to be my next point. Something to look good. Any opinions? The panelists can jump in if they have opinions as well. The visual is not very clear. It's hard to understand. Great. That's really interesting. Did anyone get a message from this visualization? Well, because we're low on time, doesn't help some content, doesn't help that I stripped away the context. True. But does the visualization stand on its own? Sometimes I think is a really important, an important thing to think about, because this visualization, so this is from a New York Times article, and the visualization takes up a lot of real estate on our screens when we're kind of scrolling through, and is it communicating a message that that is important, that supports the story that we're trying to tell. So the New York Times article was about, so I got a message I got: countries with stay-at-home orders have less travel, counties without stay-at-home orders have more travel. Great. I think that is, I think, the message that they were trying to communicate. Something else that's a little interesting, so they use this, like, red, I think, kind of trying to convey, or at least the message I get from red is bad, so more travel is bad. Also through the visualization, the size of the circles is the population size in the different counties represented here. After a few minutes, you can gather that travel decreased significantly in countries with counties with stay-at-home orders, but not clear which counties these are. Yes. So, for example, this at the top visualization, the very big one near average, that's Los Angeles County, for example. So this also is conveying size. There's a lot of things trying to be communicated in this visualization. When I saw it personally, I had more questions than answers. Because when I look at it, I see that actually it's kind of the size of the counties that travel less that seems to be doing something, and maybe that's because in bigger counties, maybe you don't need to travel as much. This is based on cell phone data. And so, yeah, it's, I think it's an interesting visualization.
Caitlin, can I interrupt 1 second, because I see we are 5 minutes from the original schedule. Can I ask participants and audience if they can confirm if they have another 10 minutes beyond schedule, if they are fine to go until 3:40 instead of 3:30 our time, of course. And if you have any issue, of course, just let us know. But yeah. So, okay, fine with me, fine. Okay. Thank you so much for your flexibility. Thank you, and over to you, Caitlin. Thank you. So we have another 15 minutes. Thanks.
Great, fantastic. So the next visualization, and then who is it for? So it's from the New York Times, so I assume it's for their readers, so kind of more of a general public type visualization. The next visualization, I won't spend as much time on this, but if you do have, like, what's the message, who's it for, this is more of an infographic, I guess, you can drop that in if you think it's effective, you can drop that in the chat. But I think this one really helps to get to Anna's point, because while there's these data points that we can look at here, in many ways, I think that the title does a lot of work in conveying the message of this visualization. So does anyone want to drop into the chat their opinions on this visualization? Do they get the message? Thank you. I was going to drop in the original chart, so thank you for sharing that. There's also some maps in there as well. I can drop in the link to the original chart here too. So any ideas also worth mentioning, it was a dynamic graph. Yes, it was a dynamic graph. This one is also dynamic, actually. Okay, the message currently is lost. It had been easier to organize the graph by class and working modality dynamically. Interesting. It's really interesting. It's interesting to me as well that the message was completely lost. I found this message really easy to see. So it's also how different people receive information as well. People who are less wealthy have to work as usual. I find it easy to understand. Interesting. Great. So the point of this exercise, a little bit, I have to say, it's a little bit easier when you can put visualizations on a wall. But when designing visualizations, I always like to say, ask yourself two very important questions. What is the message? What are you trying to say? And who is the audience? Who are you trying to say it to? And always coming back to this, I think, is incredibly important. Sorry, I keep clicking. So designing simply. So Lisa and I always talk about the KISS approach, keep it simple, stupid approach to visualization. So reducing the clutter, using techniques such as pre-attentive attributes to do the work for your audience. This is kind of one of my big messages, and it really goes back to Anna's point, is we want to do some of the work for our audience. We want to make sure that through our visualizations, we're helping them understand what we're trying to say and really getting to the point. So how can we reduce clutter? So I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. This is it's not being dynamic right now for some reason, but essentially the dynamic version of this, it removes all the background. But so when we're making charts, especially, we want to remove the chart borders, remove the grid lines, remove the data markers, clean up the axis labels, label directly, use consistent colors. So really be minimalistic in our design choices to help us convey that message clearly. So then pre-attentive attributes. So pre-attentive attributes are ways that you can draw someone's eye to something. This, to me, I think is a really great example of both using color to draw someone's eye to the message I think that this chart maker was trying to draw it to, but also doing the work for the audience. Don't make them do the math for them. So this, to me, is a really great example of helping your reader understand the message that you're trying to get across. And then get to the point. I think a lot of times when we communicate very, very, very big numbers, and those can be hard for individuals to digest. So I thought this was a great example from the OSHA communication branch of 1 in every 45 people on the planet are in humanitarian need. That, to me, really communicates a clear message. I can understand that. I feel something emotionally with that, rather than some of the big numbers that we often communicate with that can be really difficult to digest. And I don't know what 1 million people is. I can't kind of grasp what that would look like. So right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there are a lot of visualizations. I actually saw a tweet this morning that until we get a better understanding of what's going on, we need to have a halt on data visualization. But we're going to continue to make visualizations to communicate about this ongoing crisis that we're in. So how can we do it well, and how can we do it effectively? So a few of the things that we've been thinking about is consider the impact and effect of our data visualization. So we have this data responsibility graph right here. Sorry, it's so small. It's a little hard to see. I appreciate. I can send all of these links so you can see the original sourcing of this. But in the first map, we're using red, which can be quite sensationalist. When I see red maps, especially around this pandemic, the main effect it has on me is my blood pressure rises. And I don't know, sometimes you can obscure the message in that kind of jolting impact and that sensationalist nature, but also the importance, especially with these shaded maps, of using relative numbers. So on the blue chart, again, you can't really see this, and I'm very sorry for that, but it's like per 100,000, I think. And so you can see that the chart looks very, very differently when you use relative numbers. So really thinking, is the data backing up what our visualization is saying? And really being critical when we assess our own visualizations to make sure that we are communicating what the data is really saying. And in this case, we're not just communicating population density or size. And then social responsibility. This, at the very beginning of when COVID was really taking off, this to me was the chart that went the most viral. And I think it's a really great example of a compelling chart that is simple to understand and that could be like a rallying call. And it has a really interesting history behind it. It was originally created in like the first one that they've seen of it was in like a 2007 CDC paper, and it's been iterated on. And people made really specific choices like adding that healthcare line, and it communicates this message of like what we're all trying to do together. So I thought that was a really great example of, through our data visualizations, communicating social responsibility. And then the last kind of chart that we have, or the last kind of example, so linear versus logarithmic scale around this crisis. So we're seeing more and more. This is the most logarithmic scales I've seen in a very, very long time. Historically, I think some people were weary about using logarithmic scales because they think that the audience doesn't understand what a logarithmic scale is. And that's probably true in many cases. And I think the important thing to keep in mind is that it might not matter. What I really find compelling about this linear versus logarithmic chart on bending the curve, I can drop in the link from the New York Times where I took this from, is on the first one, when it's a linear scale, all I see is like what looks like two lines that are maybe along the same thing. They're both growing exponentially. They look similar. And on the logarithmic scale, I actually see the difference. I see that the lines look like they might be converging. So that means Italy might be going down, the US, the rate of change is higher, because logarithmic scales really help communicate the rate of change better. And so I think that that is really important. Look at your visualizations when you're making them. What is the message that is being communicated? And then the last one, is location important? There's geographic data associated with COVID-19, and our instinct is to throw geographic data on a map. But I think it's really important to step back and be like, is geography the most important relationship that I want to convey through my data visualization? And then when we do, if that is the case, so in this case, maybe the geography was really important, we want to kind of show the spread. What I think is really beautiful, this is a data wrapper chart, and that we could actually take and remix. What I think is really, really well done here is on the hover over, so it is a dynamic chart, and on the hover over, it says this very simple phrase, we know of X number of confirmed cases. And I think that this does something, I like to say, embrace the complexity of a situation. We're in a very complex environment. There's a lot of uncertainty. That uncertainty exists within the data. So taking this as an opportunity to convey that uncertainty, to convey that complexity, I think is incredibly important. So that was a lot of me talking. I tried to get through it quickly. I apologize if it was if I spoke too quickly. I'm going to hand over to Lisa, and Lisa and Cecilia, who are going to wrap us up. But throw any questions in the chat. I can drop any links to the charts that I've shared.
Thank you, Caitlin. Lisa, any further comment, any further insight?
No. We have some resources that we'll share in, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead, please, Lisa.
I had muted and then unmuted myself. We have some resources. We've all done that. So that we'll be sharing, based on what we presented here. So, we'll be releasing some resources that some are for trainers that want to pick up and do some data literacy trainings, and then also we're going to have some kind of micro-learning modules on basic data tasks that we'll be releasing, And then there's these resources. So there's the OCHA LMS that would be available for everybody to go to. And then we have some also other resources that we find useful for visualization and for data skills. So just wanted to thank again.
Yeah, this is absolutely useful, and we will share the recordings and the links to all participants. And for those of you who are not within OCHA, we will share by email. For the colleagues, we will place all the recordings and the resources on our OCHA hub. So yeah, you can be sure that you will find all what you need. Thank you very much, Lisa and Caitlin. I would like now to pass the ball. If you could kindly, Lisa, pass the ball to Alfred. Alfred will take us through a very, very quick poll. We are at the end of it. We have another 3 minutes to go. So Alfred, if you could kindly open the poll. And it's fine, don't worry, it's fine. Yeah, these presenters' rights are a bit laborious to pass on. Voila, so you can see now the poll opened up on your left hand of the screen. If you could kindly take 1 minute to respond. And while you do so, I think I would hand over to Jeanette as well, so she will close the session. But let's see, we have another 1 minute. Maybe we can wait before I hand over to Jeanette.
Thank you, Cecilia. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we do hear you.
Great.
So we have another minute to go, and thanks, colleague, for taking your time. So yeah, we have a few colleagues who have already finished.
Okay.
And a few not started yet, but yeah, maybe you can, yeah, please go ahead.
It's a moment. Thank you so much, Lisa and Caitlin. It's been an intense 1 hour and a bit deep dive, but certainly you've left us with a lot of important information, knowledge, tools, and all those resources. So I really encourage that everyone go deeper in this topic. And please do join us for the other webinars that are coming up over the year. The next one is a 2-part series on gender equality and gender-based violence, taking place on 12th and 26th of May. And please don't hesitate to reach out if we can support you in any way. Do also check the OCHA Hub Learning Center. We're always putting new information resources. And very important, please do share your feedback with us on our programs, our services. It's always a work in progress, and want to do everything we can to better meet your needs. And with this, I will close. I will say be well and keep healthy. And I look forward to the next time we're together. And thanks so much once again to our presenters and also to the facilitation team. Thank you. Bye-bye. Until the next time.
Thank you all of you, and be safe, be well, and goodbye.
Thank you so much, and I just wanted to say there was a question in the chat about the presentation, and we will share it. So thank you, everyone.